For 300 years, humanity had been the galaxy's helper. They arrived at disaster zones before anyone asked. They fed the hungry, healed the sick, and buried the dead of species that were not their own. When two empires went to war, it was human diplomats who sat between them and found words for peace. When plagues swept across distant worlds, human doctors worked until they collapsed. The galaxy had a name for them. They called humans the soft ones. The great races of the Galactic Concord found humanity amusing. The Torvan, with their scaled bodies and ancient pride, saw humans as clever pets. The crystalline Mordith thought them interesting but fragile. The insectoid Vethkai viewed them as little more than future slaves waiting to be collected. 12 elder species sat on the Concord, and all of them agreed on one thing. Humans were useful, but they were not important. Ambassador Elena Vasquez had served the Concord for 20 years. She had gray in her dark hair now, and lines around her eyes from too many sleepless nights. She believed in the work. She believed that kindness could change the galaxy. Every morning, she told herself that patience would win in the end. Then the raids began. The Vethkai. Hegemony controlled 40 star systems. Their hive ships moved through space like swarms of metal locusts. They had conquered 11 species before humanity ever left Earth, and they saw no reason to stop. The Outer Rim colonies were easy targets. Small populations, limited defenses, perfect for harvesting. New Damascus fell first. The Vethkai came at night, their ships blocking out the stars. They took 4,000 humans in 6 hours. Men, women, children, it did not matter. The hive factories needed workers, and human hands were good for delicate tasks. Those who resisted were killed. Those who ran were caught. Those who hid were found. Elena stood before the Galactic Concord 3 days later. The great chamber stretched around her like a cathedral made of light. 12 species watched from their platforms, their alien eyes reflecting colors humans could not name. She held a data chip in her hand. It contained footage from New Damascus. The screams, the fire, the children being dragged into transport ships. "We asked for help," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "The Vethkai have attacked the sovereign human world. They have taken our people as slaves. This is a violation of Concord law. We ask that you intervene." The Torvan delegate spoke first. His name was Vexillar, and he had served on the Concord for 2 centuries. His scales were the color of dried blood, and his voice was like stones grinding together. "The Outer Rim is disputed territory," he said. "Your colonies there are not officially recognized. This is, at best, a border dispute." "They took children," Elena said. "They put them in chains." "The Vethkai have different customs," another delegate replied. This was Councillor Mirith of the Thane Collective, a being of living metal whose face showed no expression. "We cannot impose human morality on the entire galaxy." Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. She had given her life to these beings. She had believed they were better than this. "Then what would you have us do?" she asked. Vexillar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Negotiate," he said. "Find common ground. Perhaps the Vethkai will accept payment for your people. You humans are good at talking. Talk your way out of this." The chamber filled with sounds of agreement. The elder races nodded and clicked and hummed their approval. Elena looked at each of them in turn. She memorized their faces. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life. "And if they refuse?" she asked. "If they keep raiding? If they take more of our people?" "Then perhaps," Vexillar said, leaning forward on his platform, "you should build better defenses. Or accept that the galaxy is not a kind place. Your species exists because we permit it, Ambassador. Remember that." The session ended. Elena walked out of the chamber alone. Behind her, She could hear the delegates discussing trade agreements and mining rights. The matter of 4,000 enslaved humans had already been forgotten. 3 more colonies fell in the next year: Hopeful Valley, New Singapore, Port Meridian. The Vethkai grew bolder with each raid. They knew no one would stop them. The Concord issued statements of concern. They called for dialogue. They suggested that perhaps humans had provoked the attack somehow. Elena returned to Earth on a gray morning in October. Rain fell on the ancient city of Geneva, where the United Terran Parliament held its sessions. She had requested a closed meeting with the full Parliament. No press, no broadcasts, no records. The chamber was smaller than the Concord Hall, but felt heavier somehow. 300 representatives sat in curved rows, their faces lit by soft lights. These were the leaders of humanity: presidents and prime ministers, generals and scientists, the best and brightest of a species that had reached for the stars and found only cold indifference. Elena stood at the center. She did not bring notes. She did not need them. "I have served the Galactic Concord for 20 years," she began. "I have believed with all my heart that we could find our place among the stars through cooperation, through kindness, through proving that humanity deserved to stand beside the elder races." She paused. The chamber was silent. I was wrong. The words hung in the air like smoke. "The Concord will not help us. They do not see us as equals. They do not see us as allies. They see us as convenient tools at best and acceptable losses at worst." When I showed them footage of our children being taken as slaves, they told me to negotiate. When I asked for justice, they laughed. Elena looked at the Parliament. She saw anger in their eyes. She saw pain. She saw something else, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. "The Vethkai will keep raiding," she continued. "The Concord will keep watching. And our people will keep dying. Unless we do something about it ourselves." A voice called out from the back. "What are you suggesting, Ambassador?" Elena thought about New Damascus. She thought about the children. She thought about 300 years of patience and kindness and hope, all of it thrown back in humanity's face like garbage. "I am suggesting," she said slowly, "that we stop asking for permission. I am suggesting that we stop waiting for help that will never come. I am suggesting that we remember what we are capable of when we stop being polite." The chamber erupted. Voices shouted over voices. Some called for calm. Others called for action. Elena stood at the center of the storm, and for the first time in years, she did not feel tired. The vote was held that night. It was unanimous. Humanity would handle this problem themselves. And the galaxy would learn what happened when the patient species finally ran out of patience. The galaxy noticed when humanity went quiet. It happened slowly at first. A human aid ship failed to arrive at a refugee station. A diplomatic mission was canceled without explanation. Trade routes that had operated for centuries suddenly closed. Within 6 months, humanity had pulled back behind its borders like a turtle retreating into its shell. The elder races found this amusing. In the great halls of the Concord, delegates made jokes about the soft ones nursing their wounded feelings. Vexaler told anyone who would listen that humans had finally learned their place. They would sulk for a few years, he predicted, and then they would come crawling back, begging to be useful again. No one thought to ask what humanity was doing behind those closed borders. No one thought it mattered. Commander Marcus Chen had been a humanitarian pilot for 15 years. He had flown medical supplies to plague worlds and evacuated civilians from war zones. He had never fired a weapon in anger. He had never wanted to. His ship, the Mercy's Light, had been painted white with a green cross on its hull. Everyone in the galaxy knew that symbol meant help was coming. Now the Mercy's Light sat in a military shipyard, being torn apart and rebuilt. The white paint was gone. The green cross was gone. In their place was gray armor plating and weapon systems that Marcus did not fully understand. His crew of doctors and nurses had been replaced by soldiers. His mission of mercy had been replaced by something else entirely. Marcus stood on the observation deck and watched the work. Around him, 100 other ships were undergoing the same transformation. Civilian transports became troop carriers. Cargo haulers became supply ships. Research vessels became something that made the military engineers smile in ways that made Marcus uncomfortable. "You look troubled, Commander." Marcus turned. Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood beside him, her hands clasped behind her back. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. Before the silence, she had commanded a peacekeeping fleet. Now she commanded something very different. "I became a pilot to save lives," Marcus said. "Not to take them." "So did I," Tanaka replied. "So did most of us. But saving lives sometimes means stopping the people who threaten them." She gestured at the shipyard below. "Everything you see here exists because the galaxy refused to protect our people. We asked for help. They laughed. Now we help ourselves." Marcus thought about the colony of New Horizon, where he had grown up. It was in the outer rim, not far from Vethkai space. His sister still lived there with her 2 daughters. Every night, he wondered if he would wake up to news that they had been taken. "What are we building?" he asked. "What is the Prometheus Protocol?" Tanaka smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "For 300 years, humanity has been the galaxy's helpful servant. We fixed their ships. We studied their technology. We asked questions and took notes and learned everything we could. They thought we were just being curious. They thought we were just being useful." She paused. They were wrong. The Prometheus Protocol was humanity's greatest secret. Every piece of alien technology that humans had encountered, they had studied. Every weapon system, every engine design, every shield configuration. They had taken it all apart and put it back together. And then they had made it better. The Torvon plasma cannons were powerful but slow. Human engineers had tripled their firing rate. The Mortith crystal shields were strong but energy-hungry. Human scientists had found a way to power them with half the energy. The Vethkai hive ships were terrifying but predictable. Human strategists had mapped every pattern, every weakness, every blind spot. For 300 years, humanity had smiled and helped and learned. Now they were ready to use what they had learned. Marcus spent the next 18 months training. He learned to fly his rebuilt ship like it was part of his body. He learned to target enemy vessels and calculate firing solutions. He learned to think like a warrior instead of a healer. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Sometimes, late at night, he would look at old photos of his crew from the Mercy's Light. Dr. Sarah Webb, who had delivered babies on 3 different worlds. Nurse Thomas Park, who had held dying children and sung them to sleep. They were soldiers now, all of them. The galaxy had not given them a choice. The silence lasted 2 years. In that time, the Vethkai grew careless. They raided human colonies whenever they pleased, taking thousands more slaves. They assumed humanity had given up. They assumed the soft ones had accepted their fate. On a cold morning in March, a Vethkai raiding party dropped out of hyperspace above the colony of New Helsinki. There were 6 hive ships, each carrying 1,000 warriors. They had done this 100 times before. They expected no resistance, thought they were wrong. The first hive ship exploded before it could raise its shields. The second lasted 4 seconds longer. By the time the Vethkai commander understood what was happening, half his fleet was burning. Human warships appeared from behind the colony's moon, gray and silent and deadly. They moved with a speed and precision that the Vethkai had never seen. Marcus flew in the second wave. His weapons locked onto a fleeing hive ship, and his finger hovered over the firing button. He thought about his sister. He thought about her daughters. He thought about all the children who had been dragged away in chains while the galaxy watched, and did nothing. He pressed the button. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, all 6 hive ships were debris. Not a single Vethkai survived. Not a single human ship was lost. Marcus sat in his cockpit and stared at the destruction he had helped create. He felt sick. He felt relieved. He felt 100 things he could not name. The old Marcus Chen, the one who had dedicated his life to saving people, would have wept at this moment. But that Marcus was gone. The galaxy had killed him. Across the stars, the Vethkai Hive Queen received the report from New Helsinki. Her advisors assured her it was a mistake. A fluke. The soft ones could not have built such weapons. They could not have learned to fight like this. Then the transmission arrived. It contained only 2 things. The first was a set of coordinates. The Hive Queen recognized them immediately. They were the location of her throne world, the heart of the Vethkai hegemony, a place that no enemy had ever threatened. The second thing was a single word, written in the human language. Enough. The Hive Queen stared at the message for a long time. Around her, advisors chattered and clicked, offering theories and excuses and plans. She ignored them all. She had conquered 11 species. She had ruled the Vethkai for 200 years. She had never known fear. She knew it now. The soft ones were coming. And they were not soft anymore. The war began on a Tuesday. By Friday, the Vethkai had lost 40 ships and 3 forward bases. By the end of the month, they had lost the ability to believe they could win. The galaxy had seen wars before. The elder races had fought each other for thousands of years. They had developed rules and traditions. Wars were fought over territory or resources. They involved careful movements and strategic retreats. They ended with negotiations and treaties and acceptable losses. Humanity did not follow these rules. Human fleets did not retreat. When a ship was damaged, its crew did not surrender. They flew their burning vessels into enemy formations and detonated their reactors. Human soldiers did not stop for rest. They fought in shifts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Human commanders did not negotiate. They offered one choice: release every slave or be destroyed. The Vethkai chose destruction. They would regret that choice. Commander Marcus Chun led the 7th Destroyer Wing through the Vethkai supply lines. His orders were simple: cut off their food, their fuel, their weapons. Starve them before crushing them. It was brutal work, but Marcus had stopped thinking about brutality. He thought only about the mission. His wing destroyed a supply depot in the Kethver system. They found 300 human slaves in the storage holds, waiting to be shipped to the hive factories. The slaves were thin and scarred and broken. Some of them did not remember their own names. When Marcus told them they were free, many of them did not believe him. They had forgotten that freedom was possible. That night, Marcus sat alone in his quarters and cried. He cried for the slaves. He cried for himself. He cried for the person he used to be, the healer who believed in kindness. That person was dead. A soldier had taken his place. On the other side of the war, a young Vethkai warrior named Skethra was learning a different lesson. She had been born into victory. Her species had never lost a war. They were the predators, and everyone else was prey. This was the natural order. This was how things had always been. Then the humans came. Skethra fought in the Battle of the Crimson Nebula. The Vethkai had assembled their largest fleet, 800 hive ships carrying millions of warriors. They would crush the human invasion and teach the soft ones their place. The Hive Queen herself had promised victory. The humans brought 400 ships. The battle lasted 6 hours. Skethra watched from her fighter as human cruisers plowed through the Vethkai formation like knives through water. She watched as damaged human ships, instead of retreating, accelerated toward the largest hive carriers and rammed them. She watched as human pilots ejected from their cockpits, pulled out personal weapons, and kept fighting in the vacuum of space. The HFY broke. For the first time in their history, they ran from a battle. Skethra ran with them. She was not ashamed. She was terrified. She had seen something in the eyes of those human pilots, something she did not understand. It was not hatred. It was not rage. It was something worse. It was sorrow. The humans were not enjoying this war. They were not celebrating their victories. They were simply doing what needed to be done, with a grim determination that Skethra had never seen in any species. They fought like beings who had lost something precious and would do anything to prevent losing more. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session as the war raged on. The elder races were alarmed, not at the HFY atrocities, which they had ignored for years. They were alarmed at humanity's response. Vexalar stood before the assembled delegates and demanded action. "The humans are waging unrestricted warfare," he declared. "They are violating every convention of civilized combat. They must be stopped. You want us to stop the humans?" Counselor Mirith asked. "They are winning. They are freeing slaves. They are punishing aggressors. What exactly is the problem?" "The problem," Vexalar said, his scales flushing dark with anger, "is that they are showing the galaxy that the Concord is meaningless. If humanity can wage war without our permission, what stops other species from doing the same?" The debate went on for hours. In the end, the Concord voted to impose sanctions on humanity for disproportionate military action. They demanded that humanity accept a ceasefire and enter negotiations with the VETH Admiral Yuki Tanaka received the Concord's message on her flagship. She read it twice, then called a meeting with her senior staff. "They want us to stop," she told them. "They want us to negotiate with the beings who enslaved our children." The room was silent. Officers looked at each other, waiting for someone to speak. "What is your response, Admiral?" Marcus asked. Tanaka smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Record this," she said to her communications officer. "Broadcast it to the entire Concord." She stood straight and looked directly into the camera. Her voice was calm and cold. "To the Galactic Concord. You watched our children burn. You heard their screams and did nothing. You told us to negotiate with slavers. You laughed when we asked for justice. Now you demand that we stop fighting for our people." She paused. "No, you do not get to tell us how to save our children. You lost that right when you chose to look away. This war ends when every slave is free, not one moment before." She cut the transmission. The Concord received it in stunned silence. The war continued. The HFY throne world fell 17 hours after human ships entered orbit. The Hive Queen broadcast her surrender from the ruins of her palace. She offered everything: territory, resources, reparations. She begged for mercy. The human response was silence. The fleet did not fire, but it did not leave. Ships hung in orbit like patient executioners, waiting. Marcus was there. He watched the Hive Queen's message play on every screen. He saw the fear in her compound eyes. He remembered New Damascus. He remembered the children. What are we waiting for? Someone asked. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge, her face unreadable. "We are waiting for her to understand," she said. "We are waiting for her to know, truly know, what she did to us. And then we will decide what happens next." The Hive Queen surrendered unconditionally 3 days later. She released every slave, every prisoner, every human who had been taken. She dissolved her war council. She offered herself for execution. Humanity accepted the surrender. They freed the slaves. They dismantled the Vethkai military, but they did not execute the Hive Queen. They did something the galaxy never expected. They let her live. The war was over. Humanity had won. But as Marcus looked at himself in the mirror that night, he did not feel like a victor. He felt like a stranger. The man looking back at him had done terrible things. Necessary things, perhaps, but terrible nonetheless. The question now was simple. After becoming monsters to fight monsters, could humanity find its way back? The silence after the war was worse than the fighting. For 6 months, humanity said nothing. Their fleets stayed where they were. Their borders remained closed. The galaxy waited, holding its breath, wondering what the humans would do next. The Vethkai hegemony was gone. In its place was a broken people, scattered across 40 worlds, waiting for judgment. They expected extinction. Every species they had conquered, they had either enslaved or destroyed. They assumed humanity would do the same to them. They were wrong. The first human ships to enter Vethkai space after the war were not warships. They were medical vessels, carrying doctors and supplies. They treated the wounded, fed the hungry, and helped rebuild what they had destroyed. The Vethkai did not understand. Their warriors stood in the ruins of their cities and watched humans heal their children. Skethra was among them. She had survived the war, barely. Her hive had been destroyed, her family scattered. She had nothing left but questions. Why had the humans spared them? Why were they helping? What did they want? She found the courage to ask a human doctor named James Miller. He was treating burn victims in what had been a Vethkai military hospital. His hands were gentle and his eyes were tired. Why? Skethra asked. We enslaved your people. We killed your children. Why do you help us? James looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed and sat down on a broken wall. Because someone has to be the first to stop, he said. Because if we just kept killing, we would become exactly what we were fighting against. Because my daughter asked me what the war was for, and I want to have an answer that does not make me ashamed. Skethra did not understand. But she remembered his words. Ambassador Elena Vasquez returned to the Galactic Concord 1 year after the war ended. The Great Chamber was the same as before, but everything else had changed. The delegates did not laugh when she entered. They did not make jokes. They watched her in silence, waiting. Elena walked to the center of the chamber and stood where she had stood years ago, when she had begged for help and been refused. She looked older now, harder, but something in her eyes had not changed. You called us here, Vexaler said. His voice was quieter than before. You said you had something to say. I do, Elena replied. I want to explain what happened. I want you to understand why we did what we did. And I want to tell you what happens next. The chamber was silent. Elena took a breath and began. For 300 years, humanity chose kindness. We helped anyone who asked. We made peace where there was war. We healed the sick and fed the hungry. We did this because we believed it was right. We did this because we hoped the galaxy would see us as friends. She paused. You saw us as fools. You saw our kindness as weakness. You thought we helped because we were too soft to do anything else. You were wrong. Her voice grew stronger. We were kind because we knew what we were capable of if we were not. We chose mercy because we understood the alternative. We helped others because the other option was to hurt them, and we did not want to become that. Elena looked at each delegate in turn. Then you forced us to become exactly what we feared. You watched our children be enslaved and did nothing. You laughed at our pain. You left us no choice but to become monsters. And we were very, very good at it. Vexaler shifted uncomfortably. Other delegates looked away. But here's the thing you do not understand, Elena continued. We hated it. Every battle, every death, every burned city. We hated what we had to become. We did not celebrate our victories. We mourned them, because every enemy we killed was a reminder that kindness had failed. She straightened her back. The war is over. The Vethkai are defeated. And now we face a choice. We could become conquerors. We could build an empire on fear and force. We have the power to do it. No one in this room could stop us. The silence was absolute. But we will not, Elena said, because that is not who we want to be. We want to be the species that chose kindness. We want to be the helpers, the healers, the peacemakers. We want to be better than what the galaxy made us become. She pointed at the assembled delegates. So here is what happens next. The Vethkai will be given the chance to rebuild. Not as conquerors, but as equals. We will help them, just as we helped everyone else. And we will watch them to make sure they never threaten anyone again. And if they do? Counselor Mirith asked. Elena's eyes were cold. Then we will do what we did before. But we will give them the chance to choose differently. That is more than anyone gave us. The session ended. Delegates filed out in silence. But Vexaler stayed behind. He approached Elena with slow, uncertain steps. Ambassador, he said, I owe you an apology. What I said before about your species existing because we permit it. I was wrong. Elena looked at him. She did not smile. Yes, you were. What happens now? Vexaler asked. Between our species? Between the Concord and humanity? Elena considered the question. That depends entirely on whether you have learned anything, she said. We have shown you what we can do. Now show us what you can do. Be better. Help the weak instead of ignoring them. Stand against evil instead of looking away. Prove that you deserve to call yourselves civilized. She turned to leave, then stopped. And one more thing. If any species, anywhere in this galaxy, ever enslaves another being, humanity will respond. Not because we want to. Because someone has to. Because kindness without strength is just weakness. And we are done being weak. On a quiet afternoon 3 months later, Marcus Chun returned to New Helsinki. The colony had been rebuilt. Children played in streets that had once been battlefields. Gardens grew where bombs had fallen. He found a memorial near the spaceport. A wall of names, stretching on forever. Every human who had died in the war. Every slave who had not survived to be rescued. Every child who would never grow up. He stood there for hours, reading the names. He knew some of them. He had fought beside them. He had watched them die. Commander Chun? He turned. Skethra stood behind him, wearing the uniform of a refugee aid worker. Her compound eyes studied him with an expression he could not read. I remember you, Marcus said. The Battle of the Crimson Nebula. I remember you too, Skethra replied. You destroyed my ship. I was the only survivor. They stood in silence for a moment. Two soldiers who had tried to kill each other, meeting in a place of peace. I work with human refugees now, Skethra said. Helping them return home. Helping them rebuild. It is not much, but it is something. Why? Marcus asked. Skethra thought about the question. A human doctor told me that someone has to be the first to stop. I think I understand what he meant now. She paused. I cannot change what my people did, but I can try to be different. I can try to be better. Marcus looked at her for a long time. Then he did something he never expected. He held out his hand. Skethra stared at it, confused. Marcus showed her what to do, wrapping her clawed fingers in his palm and shaking gently. It is called a handshake, he said. It is how humans greet friends. They stood together at the memorial as the sun set. Two former enemies, shaking hands, wondering if the galaxy could learn to do the same. 20 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one had predicted. Humanity had returned to its old work, but differently. Human aid ships still arrived at disaster zones. Human doctors still healed the sick. Human diplomats still mediated disputes. But now, wherever the healers went, warships followed. Not to threaten, not to conquer, just to remind everyone that kindness and strength could exist together. The human doctrine had become galactic law. No species could enslave another. No empire could prey upon the weak. Any world that needed help could call for it, and help would come. Those who violated these rules would face consequences, not from some distant council that issued statements and did nothing. From humanity and its allies who had proven they would act. The Vethkai were among those allies now. A generation had grown up since the war, raised on stories of what their grandparents had done and why it was wrong. They had rebuilt their civilization on different principles. They had become protectors instead of predators. Some of the elder races found this disturbing. How could a species change so completely? The answer was simple. They had been given a choice, and they had chosen differently. Skethra led the Vethkai delegation to the Galactic Assembly. She was old now, her carapace gray with age, but her eyes were still sharp. She had spent 20 years working to prove that her people could be trusted. She had helped write the treaties that bound the new alliance together. She had become, against all odds, a symbol of redemption. Marcus Chen was old, too. He had retired from military service after the war and spent 15 years trying to forget what he had done. It did not work. The memories stayed with him, sharp and painful, reminding him of the person he had become. Then a friend suggested he teach at the academy, helping young officers understand the weight of what they might someday face. His class was called The Cost of Victory. It was the hardest course at the academy, not because the material was complex, but because it forced students to confront uncomfortable truths. Marcus did not glorify war. He did not celebrate humanity's triumph. He taught his students about the slaves they had freed and the cities they had burned. He taught them about the nightmares that still woke him in the darkness. He taught them that sometimes good people had to do terrible things, and that the doing left scars that never fully healed. The goal, he told them, is not to avoid becoming monsters. Sometimes you cannot avoid it. The goal is to remember who you were before and to find your way back after. That is the hardest battle of all. The threat came from beyond the galactic rim. It had no name that any species could pronounce. It was simply called the darkness because that was what it brought. Whole galaxies had fallen to it. Billions of species had been wiped out. And now it had come to this galaxy. The Galactic Assembly convened in emergency session. For the first time in history, every species in the galaxy was represented. Old enemies sat beside old friends. Ancient grudges were set aside. When faced with extinction, differences seemed less important. The Torvan delegation spoke first. Vegzeller had died years ago, but his successor remembered the lessons he had learned. "We face a threat that none of us can defeat alone," she said. "We need leadership. We need someone who has faced impossible odds before." Every eye in the chamber turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Sofia Vasquez stood. She was Elena's granddaughter, named in honor of the woman who had changed the galaxy. She had her grandmother's dark hair and her grandmother's steady voice. "Humanity will lead this fight," she said. "Not because we are the strongest, not because we enjoy war. We will lead because we have proven that we will not give up. We will fight until the last ship. We will stand until the last soldier falls. And we will never, ever surrender." She looked around the chamber. "But we do not ask you to follow us blindly. We ask you to stand beside us. Not as subjects, but as partners. Not as subordinates, but as equals. This is not humanity's war. This is everyone's war. And we will win it together. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in galactic history, every species united under a common cause. The combined fleet assembled at the edge of known space. Thousands of ships from hundreds of worlds, representing species that had once fought each other and now stood shoulder to shoulder. Human cruisers flew beside Torvan battleships. Vethkai hive carriers protected Mortith crystal frigates. The smallest species and the largest, the oldest and the youngest, all of them together. Fleet Commander Sofia Vasquez stood on the bridge of the flagship and looked out at the stars. Somewhere beyond those stars, the darkness waited. It destroyed galaxies. It had wiped out civilizations that had existed for millions of years. And now it faced something it had never encountered before. It faced a galaxy that had learned to stand together. Elena Vasquez was very old now. She lived in a small house on Earth, surrounded by gardens and memories. She had seen everything change in her lifetime. She had seen humanity fall and rise and find its way home. Sophia visited her grandmother before the fleet launched. They sat together in the garden as the sun set, 2 generations of a family that had shaped history. "Are you afraid?" Elena asked. "Yes," Sophia admitted. "The darkness has destroyed everything it has ever touched. We might lose." Elena nodded slowly. "We might. But we might win too. And either way, we will face it together. That matters. That has always mattered." Sophia was silent for a moment. "Grandmother, what do you think about when you remember the war? When you remember what we had to become?" Elena considered the question carefully. She thought about New Damascus and New Helsinki. She thought about the children who had been taken and the soldiers who had brought them home. She thought about all the pain and all the hope, tangled together in ways that could never be separated. "I think about balance," she said finally. "We tried kindness alone, and it was not enough. We tried strength alone, and it nearly destroyed us. We had to find a way to be both. Strong enough to protect the people we love. Kind enough to be worth protecting." She reached out and took her granddaughter's hand. "That is what I want you to remember, Sophia. When you face the darkness, remember why you are fighting. Not for conquest. Not for glory. For the chance to build something better. For the hope that someday we will not need warships anymore. For the dream that kindness can win in the end." The fleet launched at dawn. Sophia watched Earth grow smaller in the view screen until it was just a blue dot among millions of stars. Then she turned to face the unknown. Behind her, a galaxy stood united. Behind her, species that had once been enemies now called each other friends. Behind her, the long work of 300 years had finally borne fruit. Humanity had learned a simple truth in that time. Their greatest strength was never their warships or their weapons. It was not their fury or their determination. Their greatest strength was that they had tried kindness first, that they had mourned when it was not enough, and that they had never stopped hoping for something better. The war for the galaxy began. And whatever came next, humanity would face it the way they had faced everything else. Together, with open eyes and open hearts, ready to fight and ready to forgive. Some things were worth protecting. Some things were worth dying for. And some things were worth believing in, even when the darkness seemed endless. Humanity believed. That was enough.